Okay, gentlemen, today's announcement is really significant. It will influence both you and myself. The new U.S. economy has arrived, Trump is now president, and we are nearing the worst-case scenario. A worldwide trade war is about to begin. Now, if we look back 3 years, it's been crisis after catastrophe. It's been a downward ride from the war in Europe to the collapse of U.S. banks, but what's next might be even worse. We need to look at what Trump has promised and how his policies will affect the global economy. $33 trillion in global commerce is currently under significant threat. Let's speak about the tariff battle. Trump is going to follow his promise, imposing a 25% tax on Mexico and Canada, and this time he has given an actual date. The sanctions will begin on February 1st, thus less than 2 weeks away. The reason now focuses around the border issue in order to persuade the Mexicans to reduce the flow of illegal immigration. But as we have already stated, it all boils down to bringing industry back to the United States. Mexico and Canada are the largest exporters to the United States, with massive trade surpluses. Both economies export a massive amount of production to U.S. consumers. And owing to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mexican imports have skyrocketed. They now account for 15% of total U.S. exports. A large volume of Canadian items is also entering the U.S. consumer market. It accounts for more than 13% of everything. What's alarming is the degree of reliance here. Over 70% of both countries' exports are sold to the United States. You can imagine how much power Trump wields over both the Canadian and Mexican economies. Both countries now rely heavily on the sale of produced commodities. Cars, for example, are manufactured in Mexico and Canada. Trump may now smash the debt of the car sector by blocking the U.S. market. And it is only one example of collateral harm. And Trump is not joking at all. Yes, a trade war would eventually harm the United States, but he made that perfectly clear during his inaugural speech. This is how things will proceed from here. So, what happens to Mexico and Canada? Nothing nice. Because of their reliance, a 25% tariff across the board will devastate their economy. Here are the impacts. GDP will fall in all 3 nations, including the United States. However, the economic impact on Trump's economy would be far smaller than his trade war goals. U.S. GDP might fall by 0.25% by 2027 before leveling to a mere 10 basis points. Economic development would be modest. Canada would sustain at least 5 times the damage. GDP might decrease by as much as 1.25%. Long-term growth might fall by approximately 90 basis points. Mexico would be the hardest affected. In the worst-case scenario, GDP may fall by 2%. By 2040, the economy would still see a 1.35% drop in growth. A trade war with the United States might force Canada and Mexico off a cliff. And we're talking about recessions that come after one another. And why is Mexico the worst hit? Because exports account for 40% of its GDP, with 80% of that going to the United States. And over again, this is a narrative about countries being overly reliant on a single market. This is a huge worldwide warning. But what about inflation? Will the United States suffer more than Canada and Mexico? And here's when things become very interesting. The trade war may force Canada's inflation to climb by 1.7% in 2025. For Mexico, it might reach 2.3%. The rise, however, may be less than 0.5% in the United States. This appears to be fairly conservative. Inflation would undoubtedly be greater than these forecasts. But why is U.S. inflation lower? And it's all about the U.S. currency and interest rates. The euro-dollar system, in this situation, will protect the U.S. economy against inflation. I realize it's unfair, but this is how the world system works. Their inflation will be lower, at least when compared to Mexico and Canada. So, what have we witnessed during the last few months? Following Trump's inaugural address, the U.S. dollar index rose even higher. In other words, worldwide currencies have fallen. Almost immediately following his statements, The Canadian dollar and Mexican peso plummeted by more than 1%. And in the world of currencies and forex, this is a massive change in a couple of minutes. If Trump restricts access to the U.S. market, income for Canada and Mexico would fall. This includes losing access to the flow of U.S. cash, as well as decreasing profits. This is a double whammy, folks. Importing their own goods, services, and inputs is becoming increasingly expensive. There's nothing either country can do about it. This is exactly how the euro-dollar system operates. So, if your nation is on the receiving end of U.S. tariffs and you rely on U.S. markets, you should expect increased local inflation. There's no avoiding this. This is coming to a currency near you. However, the United States is beginning to back off when it comes to China. This is a pretty strange situation. Trump is requesting a study of the Chinese economy before slapping tariffs. If you were at the markets, you probably noticed the consequences. Chinese stocks rose significantly. There's a lot of conjecture about why Trump is holding back on China. Why pledge tariffs on Canada while backtracking on China? Undoubtedly, there are several choices. Trump personally issued an ultimatum. He said that the tariffs may be contingent on the TikTok transaction. This might be a viable option. Getting the app extends beyond the Trump administration. I believe we should have all known this by now. It's most likely a profound state of foreign policy objectives. Will TikTok's parent firm, ByteDance, sell the app in the U.S.? Will it wind up in the hands of Elon Musk? There is a lot of confusion, but it appears Trump is connecting the app to tariffs. He stated that the U.S. should be entitled to half of TikTok. If Beijing rejects the agreement, he may absolutely apply trade taxes. The import duty might be as high as 100%. This, of course, is inconceivable. Trump may believe he has a negotiating chip. The U.S. has 170 million users for the Chinese app. But is that actually enough leverage? There is a strong probability TikTok will never sell in the United States. Because if they capitulate, the remainder of Chinese technology will be on U.S. territory. It will never stop. But let us take a larger economic picture. Perhaps Trump is hesitant because of the potential impact on the U.S. economy. Hitting China seems bold, but it will backfire. In the same analysis below are the implications of a 10% increase in tariffs on Chinese imports. We can notice something quite fascinating. China's inflation rate would rise by 17 basis points in 2025. 2 years later, it would have returned to near normal levels. However, inflation in the United States would rise faster than in China. It will rise by more than 0.5% this year. Remember, this is predicated only on an additional 10% tax on China. If Trump goes all out and imposes a 60 or even 100% import tax, it will backfire horribly. Inflation in the United States would be far greater than in China. Now, I'm not denying that Trump will do it. He is the ultimate wild card. For all we know, we may be in a full-fledged global trade war tomorrow. Recognize how reliant the United States is on cheap Chinese goods. Sure, the electric vehicles aren't coming in. The solar panels and batteries are effectively blocked. But take a trip to the grocery store, and you'll see what I mean. Chinese vendors account for at least 70% of Walmart's inventory. The American supply chain is fueled by manufacturers in China, making things quite simple. If the United States hikes tariffs by 10%, Walmart's prices will jump by 10%, maybe more. If a 60% tax is imposed, prices will go much higher. And can Trump actually accomplish this? It would make Biden's inflation appear quite moderate. People and corporations in the United States are concerned about a trade war with China. As a result, they are taking advantage of a loophole to purchase Chinese goods without paying any tariffs. Chinese shipments of tiny packages have increased dramatically in recent years. It increased from $8 billion to over $20 billion a year. Any purchase under $800 can be carried into the United States without duties. I'm sure this loophole will be fixed, but it highlights the U.S. economy's reliance on Chinese businesses. Another worry is reprisal from China, and let's be honest here. If Trump's tariffs rise much, China will retaliate 100%. The first approach would be to provide their own stimulus to boost domestic spending. Let's talk about the tit-for-tat response. What if China strikes back at the US? What would the collateral harm be? And ordinarily, I would describe this as an extreme view, but we have moved beyond that. The baseline scenario is China opposing the United States. In 2023, the United States exported about $150 billion in products to China. Services account for more than $40 billion. There is a lot of employment behind those trade lines. Chinese money directly supports over 1 million American jobs. Almost every business has some amount of Chinese exposure, which might disappear in a trade war. Here's a list of the industries that would be most affected by a conflict with China. And if you're in one of them, it's time to prepare for impact. U.S. agriculture is the industry with the highest exposure. Nearly 180,000 jobs are at stake in only the oil, seeds, and grains industries. Education is another option. If Chinese students begin to emigrate, employment in colleges and universities would disappear. As we progress down the list, we can see that China can reduce its reliance on several industries. Ships, aircraft, and chemicals may all be created locally. Trade war retribution is not a myth here, folks. Trying to establish many fronts is extremely perilous, especially for the U.S. The G7 may not retaliate totally. They can always turn over. But China is a whole other beast. Remember the degree of help the Chinese economy receives. They get inexpensive energy from Russia. Trade between the BRICS countries is also increasing. Let's not overlook the two new nations that joined. Indonesia is a member of the bloc, while Nigeria is a new partner, more markets for China to sell in. Despite the decoupling, Chinese exports are still increasing. In December, goods sold into the United States increased by 2.6%. Compare it to Southeast Asia. China's largest trade partner imported 5.4% more. So the greatest portion of the pie, which is not the U.S. market, is becoming increasingly enormous. Really something to think about here. So brace yourselves for impact, boys. We are on the brink of yet another calamity. Except this time, it extends beyond Russia and Ukraine. Every economy on Earth will be impacted. It will not be nice or positive, rather, it will be the exact opposite. And absolutely, things may become much more chaotic. But tell me what you think. Will the United States punish the globe with a trade war? Will Trump bash China or back down? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to like and subscribe as we navigate these tumultuous times.